The glass hit the floor before anyone could stop it, a sharp crack that cut through the dinner rush like a snapped wire. And suddenly every fork paused midair, every conversation dropped into silence, and all eyes turned to the center of the room, where Ava Johnson stood frozen beside table 12, her tray tilted, a thin line of red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like a stain that could not be undone, and across from her, a man in a tailored navy suit leaned back in his chair with a slow, deliberate sigh, the kind that was not about inconvenience, but about control. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, his voice calm but sharpened at the edges, and no one moved, not the hostess by the door, not the line cook peeking through the kitchen window, not even the couple at the next table who suddenly found their plates very interesting. Ava did not answer right away, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the tray. Steady, contained, her posture still straight despite the heat rising to her face. "I asked for a simple pour," the man continued, louder now, letting the words travel, letting them land. "And instead I get this." He gestured at the spill without looking down, because he did not need to. The damage was not the point. The moment was. And then Richard Caldwell stepped in, his presence shifting the air before he even spoke. The owner, the billionaire, the man whose name was printed on the menu in gold lettering. He did not ask what happened. He did not look at Ava. He looked at the table, the guest, the stain, and made a decision in less than a second. "You are done here," he said flatly, his voice cutting cleaner than the broken glass, and a quiet ripple moved through the room. Ava blinked once, just once, then set the tray down carefully on the nearest empty table as if nothing inside her had been shaken loose. "Sir, the dish on this table," she began, her voice low, controlled. "But..." Richard raised a hand without turning to her, dismissing the sentence before it could exist. "I am not interested in excuses," he said, still facing the guest, still performing for the room. "You embarrassed this restaurant." And for a brief second, something shifted behind Ava's eyes, not anger, not fear, something quieter, something measured. She glanced once at the plate in front of the man, then back at Richard, and said nothing more. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. And if you have ever been in a room like that, where one voice decides someone else's worth, then you know exactly how it feels to stand there and not be seen. And if this moment is hitting you in a way you did not expect, take a second, breathe. Maybe let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because stories like this have a way of finding people at the exact moment they need them. And if you want to stay with this one, to see where it leads, you might want to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what happens next. Because Ava Johnson did not argue. She did not plead. She untied her apron slowly, folded it once, and placed it on the table beside the broken glass, her movements precise, almost gentle, like she was finishing something rather than losing it. And as she turned to walk toward the back hallway, past the kitchen door that swung open just enough to reveal the chaos waiting behind it, no one noticed the way her eyes lingered for half a second on that untouched plate, and no one, not even Richard Caldwell, realized that the problem in this room had nothing to do with the spilled glass. The kitchen door had barely stopped swinging when Ava stepped through, and the noise hit her all at once. Burners hissing, plates clattering, voices overlapping in tight, controlled chaos. But something in the rhythm was already off, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew what it was supposed to sound like. And Ava did. She always did. Her eyes moved quickly across the line, the grill station lagging half a beat, the expo counter stacking tickets too fast, a young cook reaching for a garnish that was not prepped, small fractures forming in real time. She kept walking, steady, not rushing, not hesitating, heading toward the back locker area, as if she were just another employee ending a shift, except no one stopped her, no one called her name. Because no one was watching the system, they were reacting to it, and that was the difference. Behind her, a voice cut through the kitchen. "Where is table 12's replacement?" someone shouted, and another voice answered. "I thought Ava handled that." Followed by a pause that lasted just a second too long. Ava did not turn back. She reached her locker, opened it, and pulled out her worn notebook, the one she never left behind. Flipping it open with practiced ease, pages filled with tight, precise handwriting, order patterns, allergies, substitutions, Notes no one had ever asked her to keep, but everyone had relied on without realizing it. She ran her thumb along the edge of one page, then closed it again, slipping it into her bag. Out in the dining room, a sudden ripple of raised voices broke through the kitchen noise, sharper this time, less controlled, and one of the servers pushed through the door, breath quick. "Table 12 says the dish tastes off," he said, not loud, but urgent enough to carry. And for the first time, someone actually looked toward the hallway where Ava had disappeared. Richard stood near the pass, his jaw tightening slightly, not in panic, not yet, but in irritation. "Then fix it," he said, quick, dismissive, but the server did not move. "We already sent it back once," he replied, "and that was new. That was not supposed to happen." Richard's eyes flicked briefly toward the plate as it came back through the window. Untouched, the garnish. Slightly disturbed, and for a fraction of a second, something registered, something he could not quite place, because he had not heard what Ava tried to say. Not really. Another order bell rang, louder this time, stacking over the others, and the expo reached for tickets, hesitated, then grabbed the wrong one, sending a plate to the wrong table. A mistake small enough to fix, but only if someone caught it early. No one did. The rhythm slipped further, one station falling behind, another overcompensating, and the kitchen noise shifted from controlled pressure to something looser, more reactive, and Richard felt it. Even if he could not name it, he stepped closer to the pass, scanning, looking for the problem, but all he saw were people doing their jobs, just not quite in sync. And in the back hallway, Ava paused for the briefest moment before the exit door, her hand resting on the handle, listening, not to the noise itself, but to the pattern breaking apart. And then she pushed the door open and stepped out, leaving behind a system that had just begun to forget how to hold itself together. The moment the door closed behind Ava, the imbalance sharpened, not loud at first, but precise, like a machine losing a single gear, and inside the kitchen Richard felt it shift again, this time impossible to ignore. A plate came back untouched from table 12, then another from table 9, and then a third ticket was called twice from the pass because no one could confirm if it had already gone out. Who is tracking these orders? Richard snapped, stepping closer, his voice no longer calm, and the expo hesitated, glancing down at the scattered tickets as if they might rearrange themselves into order. "We are rotating stations tonight," he said, but even he did not sound convinced, because that was not how this place ran. Not really. Not until now. A server pushed in again, faster this time. "Table 6 has a severe allergy. They say the dish has the wrong garnish." And that word landed heavier than it should have. Wrong. Garnish, a small detail. But in a system like this, small details were everything. Richard turned sharply toward the line. Who plated that? No one answered immediately. Not because they did not know, but because they were no longer sure. The rhythm had slipped too far. And then, almost quietly, one of the older cooks spoke without looking up. "Ava usually checks that." And the name hung there for a second, unwanted, inconvenient, but undeniable. Richard's jaw tightened again, this time. Different, not irritation, something closer to recognition, but he pushed it down. "Then someone else needs to step up," he said, sharper now. But even as he spoke, another bell rang, and another plate stalled at the pass because no one had marked it complete, and across the room, a manager was already smoothing over a complaint at table 12, offering apologies that felt rehearsed, stretched thin. And then came the first real break. A host approached Richard with a tablet in hand, her expression controlled but urgent. "We just got 3 cancellations for later tonight," she said quietly. They saw the reviews coming in, and she turned the screen just enough for him to see. A single star, then another, short sentences stacking quickly. "Service is disorganized. Food quality inconsistent. Not what it used to be." And Richard stared at it longer than he should have. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the speed. This was happening too fast, faster than a single mistake could explain. He looked back toward the kitchen, scanning again, not for a person this time, but for a pattern, something missing, something that had been there before without him noticing. And for the first time that night, he did not give an order. He did not raise his voice. He just watched. And in that silence, another detail surfaced, the way orders used to move without being called twice, the way mistakes were corrected before they reached the table. The way no one ever had to ask who was responsible because it was already handled, and now none of that was happening. And the realization came in slowly, not as a full answer, but as a question he could not ignore, not who made the mistake, but who used to prevent them. And just as that thought settled, a server rushed in again, breath tight. "Sir, table 12 is asking for you personally." And this time Richard did not hesitate. He moved fast, stepping out of the kitchen and back into the dining room where the same table waited, the same untouched plate sitting in front of the guest, and the man looked up at him with a measured expression that had lost its patience. "This is not about the spill anymore," he said, calm, controlled. "Something is wrong with your kitchen." And for the first time that night, Richard did not respond immediately, because deep down, he already knew that whatever was wrong had walked out the door just minutes ago. Richard did not sit down. He remained standing at the edge of the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of the empty chair across from the guest, his posture controlled but no longer effortless. "We are fixing it right now," he said. But the words lacked the certainty they carried just minutes ago, and the man at table 12 tilted his head slightly, studying him, not impressed, not angry, just observant. "You already had the chance to fix it," he replied, his tone steady. "I watched your staff send the same dish out twice, and both times no one could tell me what was actually on the plate. And that landed differently, not as a complaint, but as a diagnosis." Behind Richard, another server hesitated near the table, holding a fresh plate that she clearly did not trust, her grip too tight, her eyes flicking between the guest and the kitchen door, waiting for someone to confirm. No one did. Richard glanced back once, just long enough to see the uncertainty ripple outward, and then he turned back, forcing his voice to stay even. "We will remove this from your bill," he said, but the man shook his head almost immediately. "This is not about the bill," he said again, softer now, and that softness carried more weight than anything louder could have. "This place used to run like a system. Now it feels like guesswork." And for the first time, Richard did not interrupt, because that word, system, hit something he had just started to recognize, something he could not fully explain yet, a pattern that had existed without him naming it. And before he could respond, a commotion rose near the entrance, not loud, but urgent. Enough to pull attention. Two guests were standing, coats already on, speaking quickly to the hostess. One of them gesturing back toward the dining room with a sharp, frustrated motion, and the hostess nodded repeatedly, her smile strained, offering apologies that did not hold. And then they walked out, just like that. No scene, no raised voices, just a quiet exit that carried more consequence than any argument. Richard watched them go for a second too long, and when he turned back, the man at table 12 was already reaching for his phone, not to check a message, but to finish something he had started earlier, his thumb moving once across the screen before he set it down, and he did not need to say what it was. The damage was already out there, visible, multiplying. "You should check your back of house," the man added, almost casually. "Your problem is not out here." And this time, Richard did not argue. He stepped back from the table without another word and turned toward the kitchen, moving faster now, not with authority, but with urgency. And as he pushed through the door, the difference was immediate. The noise had not just grown louder. It had changed, voices overlapping. Without coordination, tickets piling at the pass, a plate sitting too long under the heat lamp because no one had called it. And in the middle of it all, the expo stood frozen for a split second, staring at the board as if waiting for it to tell him what to do. And that was the moment it clicked, not fully, but enough. This was not a staffing issue, not a training issue. It was a gap, a missing layer that had held everything together. And without it, everyone else was just reacting. And then the mini twist came, quiet but undeniable. The same older cook who had spoken before reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it on the counter in front of Richard without a word. Richard looked down, unfolded it, and recognized the handwriting instantly. Tight, precise, the same kind of notes he had seen scattered in the margins of prep sheets without ever asking who wrote them. It was a simplified flow of the entire service: table pacing, allergy flags, backup, substitutions, corrections marked in small arrows, and at the top, a single line, not signed, not labeled, just written clearly. "Check every plate before it leaves." Richard stared at it for a second, then another, and for the first time that night, He understood that the system had never been automatic. It had been maintained, quietly, consistently, by someone he had just sent out the door. And as another order bell rang behind him, sharper than before, he did not call out a command. He picked up the pen lying next to the paper and hesitated, because knowing what was missing was not the same as knowing how to replace it. Richard did not write anything on the paper at first. He just stood there with the pen in his hand while the kitchen moved around him in uneven bursts, one station rushing, another stalling, the balance gone. And then another bell rang, sharper, closer, pulling him back. "Order up," someone called, but no one moved to confirm it. And that was when Richard stepped forward, not as the owner watching from the edge, but into the space itself. He grabbed the plate from the pass, looked down at it, scanning, not tasting, not checking presentation, but trying to see what Ava would have seen, something small, something easy to miss, and for a second, he saw nothing, just a finished dish, clean, plated, acceptable. And then he noticed it. The garnish was wrong again, not dangerous, not obvious, but incorrect, inconsistent, and that word echoed in his head. Inconsistent. The same word from the reviews, from the guest, from the unraveling system itself. He set the plate back down. "Stop," he said, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the noise, and for the first time all night, the kitchen actually paused, just for a second, heads turned, waiting, unsure, because this was not how he usually led, not like this. "Nothing leaves this line unless it is checked," he added, holding up the paper slightly, not explaining where it came from, not needing to, but the reaction was not what he expected. No one stepped forward, no one said yes. Instead, the expo hesitated again, glancing at the other cooks as if asking silently who was supposed to do that now. And that was the next realization, sharper than the last. This was never a rule. It was a role, and the role was gone. "You," Richard pointed to the expo. "You check it." But the young man's hands tightened around the edge of the counter, his voice low, almost apologetic. "I do not know what to look for." And that landed harder than any complaint from the dining room, because it was honest, and it exposed something deeper. Not just that Ava had been doing more, but that no one else had been taught. How? Another ticket printed, then another, stacking faster than they could process, and the pressure returned immediately. Heavier now because the pause had broken the illusion of control. A server rushed in. Again, this time with urgency that could not be contained. "Table 6 is asking if their dish is safe to eat," she said, and the room went quiet in a different way, not frozen, but tense, aware, because that question carried weight, and no one answered right away, not because they did not care, but because they did not know. Richard looked at the plate again, then at the paper, then back at the line, and for the first time, doubt crossed his face. Small, controlled, but real. He could not guarantee it. Not without the system that had just walked out. And that was the mini twist he could not ignore anymore. This was no longer about reputation or speed. It was about trust, and trust had already started to slip. "Remake it," he said finally, choosing the only safe answer. But even that caused a delay, another ripple, another crack in the flow, and in the front of the house, the tension had spread. Guests were speaking more quietly now, but more frequently, heads leaning together, phones appearing on tables, not for photos, but for something else, something that traveled faster than any fix they could make in this room. And back at the pass, Richard placed the pen down slowly, not because he had solved the problem, but because he understood something he had missed before. This place had not been running because of systems he built. It had been running because someone had been holding it together in ways he never saw. And now that she was gone, he was not just losing control of the kitchen, he was losing control of everything that depended on it. And as another order bell rang, louder than the last, he did not look at the plate this time. He looked toward the back door, the same one Ava had walked through. And for the first time that night, the problem was no longer inside the restaurant. It was outside of it. Richard moved before the next order bell finished ringing, not toward the pass this time, but toward the back hallway, his steps quick, cutting past the line, past the confusion, ignoring the voices calling his name, because for the first time that night, he was not trying to fix what was breaking. He was trying to reach what had already left. He pushed through the same door Ava had used, the noise of the kitchen dropping behind him like a wall, replaced by the dull hum of the service corridor, empty, quiet, too still compared to the chaos he had just stepped out of. He looked down the hall, expecting to see her, but there was no one, just the closed exit door at the far end, and he walked faster, reaching it in seconds, pushing it open, stepping out into the cool night air, scanning left, then right. The street was not crowded, just a few cars. Passing, distant voices, nothing that gave him direction, nothing that told him where she had gone, and for a brief second, he stood there, not as the man in control of everything inside that building, but as someone who had already lost something he did not know how to get back. Behind him, the door swung slightly, the sound of the kitchen leaking out again, sharper now, more chaotic, as if reminding him that time was not stopping for him to figure this out. He turned back inside, slower this time, but with something different in his expression, not just urgency, something heavier, recognition settling deeper. As he stepped back into the corridor, he noticed something he had missed before, a small whiteboard mounted on the wall near the lockers, something staff used to jot down quick notes, reminders, shift swaps. But tonight it was mostly blank, except for one corner where faint writing had not been fully erased, a list. Short, precise, the same handwriting as the paper he held earlier, times, table numbers, arrows pointing between them, adjustments scribbled in tight margins, and one line underlined twice. Do not rush the check. Pace the room. Richard stepped closer, reading it again, slower, and something shifted again, not just what she did, but how she thought. She was not reacting to problems. She was preventing them before they existed, and that was why everything fell off now, because no one else was thinking ahead. They were all catching up, always a step behind. A manager rushed into the hallway, breath uneven. "We need you up front," she said quickly. But then she paused when she saw him standing there, staring at the board, as if that alone explained something. "What is that?" she asked, stepping closer, and Richard did not answer right away. He reached up and traced one of the lines lightly with his finger, then stepped back. "This," he said quietly, "is how the room used to run." And the manager looked at it, confused, because to her it looked like random notes, incomplete, nothing official, nothing structured. "Who wrote it?" she asked. And Richard did not need to check the signature that was not there. He already knew, and that was the twist. Settling fully now, Ava had not just been part of the system. She had been designing it in real time, adapting it, carrying it, without anyone asking, without anyone noticing. And now that awareness changed something in him, small but irreversible, because it was no longer about replacing a worker, it was about understanding a role he had never valued. And behind them, another voice called out, louder this time. "We just had 2 more tables walk out." And the manager turned immediately, urgency, pulling her back toward the dining room. But Richard did not follow right away. He looked once more at the board, then at the exit door, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable just an hour ago. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and instead of calling the general manager, instead of calling a supplier or a chef or anyone he normally relied on, he scrolled through the employee list until he found her name, Ava Johnson, and his thumb hovered there for a second, not because he did not know what to say, but because for the first time, he understood that whatever he said next would not come from authority. It would have to come from something he was not used to using. And behind him, the sound of the restaurant continued to fracture, louder now, faster, spreading beyond the kitchen into the entire space. And for the first time that night, the collapse was no longer contained. It was visible, and it was accelerating. Richard did not press call right away. His thumb hovered over Ava's name while the noise from the dining room spilled further into the hallway. Louder now, sharper, no longer contained behind polite conversations and lowered voices. A glass clinked. Somewhere, not breaking, just set down too hard. A chair scraped, a signal that patience was thinning, and then the phone in his hand vibrated before he could decide. Not her, not yet. A notification banner slid across the screen. One review, then another, appearing in real time, faster than he could read them. Service collapsed mid-dinner. Owner lost control. Not worth the price. And the wording shifted from disappointment to certainty, as if the outcome had already been decided by people who were still sitting inside his restaurant, still watching it unfold. Richard exhaled once, controlled, then pressed the call button. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times, and for a second he thought she would not answer, that the door she walked through had already closed completely. But then the click came, quiet, and her voice followed, calm, steady, exactly the same as it had been before everything broke. Hello. And that alone changed the moment, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. No tension, no urgency, no need to prove anything. Just control. Richard opened his mouth, but the words did not come immediately, because the way he usually spoke did not fit here. Not commands, not instructions, and the silence stretched just long enough for Ava to speak again. Is the kitchen still behind? She asked, not accusatory, not surprised, just precise. And that question landed deeper than anything else that had been said all night, because it meant she already knew, not guessed, knew. Richard glanced back toward the dining room, where a server was now explaining something to a table with both hands raised slightly, trying to calm a situation that had already slipped. It is worse than behind, he admitted, the words coming slower than usual, measured. It is falling apart. Another pause, shorter this time, and then Ava spoke again. Then stop pushing tickets, she said, simple, direct. You are trying to keep up with a pace that no longer exists. And that was the first mini shift, small but immediate, because it was not what he expected, not advice to fix faster, but to slow down, to reset, something that felt counterintuitive in a crisis. If you keep sending orders out the way you are now, you are not just late, you are inconsistent, she continued, and the word hit again, consistent. The thread running through everything. Richard turned slightly, watching as another plate was rushed toward the pass, then hesitated, then sent anyway, exactly as she described. Call a pause, she said, and for a second, he almost dismissed it, because stopping service in the middle of a collapse felt like surrender. But then another server crossed his line of sight, her expression tight, carrying a plate she did not trust, and something in him shifted again, not fully, but enough. You are asking me to slow everything down, he said, not challenging, just confirming. And Ava's response came without hesitation. I am telling you to take control of the room again. And that was different, not fixing the kitchen, not replacing her, but restoring the system itself. And in the background of her call, there was no noise, no chaos, just quiet. And that contrast made everything inside the restaurant feel louder, more unstable. You already know where it breaks, she added. And that was the second twist, subtle but clear. She was not giving him new information. She was pointing him back to what he had already seen. The paper, the board, the gaps. You just have to act on it. And for the first time since the night began, Richard did not feel like he was chasing the problem. He felt like he could define it, even if only partially. He looked back toward the kitchen door, then toward the dining room, where guests were no longer just reacting. They were deciding whether to stay, whether to leave, whether to remember this place differently, and that decision window was closing fast. Stay on the line, he said, not as an order, but as a request, and there was a brief pause before Ava answered. I am not coming back tonight, she said, calm, final. And that was the boundary, clear, but then she added, but I can help you hold it together. And that was the shift that mattered, not presence, but guidance. Not control, but direction, and Richard nodded once, even though she could not see it, then turned and stepped back toward the kitchen, the phone still at his ear, the noise rising again to meet him. But this time, for the first time, he did not rush to match it. He walked in with a different pace, slower, deliberate, carrying not a solution, but a direction. And as another order bell rang, he raised his voice, not louder, but clearer than before. Stop the line, he said, and the words cut through the chaos in a way nothing else had all night. The words landed harder than anything else that night. Stop the line. And for a split second no one moved, not because they did not hear him, but because they were not used to him saying something that changed the rhythm instead of pushing it forward. The expo froze with a ticket halfway in his hand. The grill cook glanced up, uncertain, and even the constant hiss of the burners seemed louder against the sudden hesitation. Richard stepped forward, phone still at his ear. Nothing leaves until it is checked, he repeated, clearer this time. And this time the pause held, not perfect, not controlled, but real, a break in the chaos. On the other end of the call, Ava did not speak immediately. She let the silence settle, then said quietly, good, now slow the board. And Richard turned to the expo. Call tickets one at a time, he said, and the young man nodded, unsure but willing, pulling the next order forward, reading it slower than before, not rushing to clear the stack, but to understand it. And the shift was small, almost invisible to anyone outside the kitchen. But inside it changed something. The noise dropped just enough to hear individual actions again. Knives on boards, pans moving with intention instead of panic. And then came the resistance. A server pushed through the door, her expression tight. "We cannot pause like this. Tables are already waiting," she said. And that was the next escalation. Not inside the kitchen, but from the dining room, pushing back. And Richard turned to her, not dismissing, not deflecting. "They are waiting because we rushed before," he said, steady. And for a moment she looked like she might argue. But then she hesitated, because even she could feel the difference, subtle but real, and she stepped back without another word, carrying that uncertainty back out to the floor. Another ticket was called, slower, clearer, the plate built carefully this time. Each component checked, not by habit, but by intention, and when it reached the pass, Richard did not just glance at it. He leaned in, scanning the details the way Ava had, and for the first time that night, he caught it before it left. A missing element, small but critical, and he pointed to it. "Fix that," he said, and the cook adjusted it immediately. No argument, no confusion, just correction. And that was the first controlled moment they had had in hours. But the twist came from outside. A manager rushed back in, her voice lower now, more urgent than before. "We have a bigger problem," she said, holding out a tablet, and this time it was not just reviews, it was a message from a private dining client, a large reservation scheduled for the next morning, one that carried weight, visibility, reputation. "They are asking if they should cancel," she said, and the words landed differently. Not immediate chaos, but future consequence, the collapse moving beyond tonight. Richard looked at the message, then back at the line, then at the paper still resting near the pass, and for a second, everything connected, the pacing, the checks, the control, not just for now, but for what came next, and he brought the phone back to his ear. "They are pulling tomorrow already," he said quietly, and Ava's response came just as steady. "Then tonight is not about saving every table," she said. "It is about proving the system still works." And that shifted his focus again, from damage control to demonstration, from reacting to rebuilding trust, one plate at a time. Richard nodded once, even though she could not see it, then turned back to the team. "We are not chasing tickets anymore," he said, louder now, clearer. "We are resetting the standard." And this time, the words did not confuse them. They anchored them. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough. The next order came through, slower, deliberate, checked twice before it left, and as it moved out toward the dining room, the tension did not disappear, but it changed shape. From chaos into pressure, and pressure, for the first time that night, was something they could actually manage. The next plate moved slower than any before it, not because the kitchen could not go faster, but because they chose not to, each handoff deliberate, each detail checked, and when it reached the pass, Richard did not speak. He simply looked, really looked, then nodded once, small, almost unnoticeable, and the server took it without hesitation this time, carrying it out with a steadiness that had been missing all night. The noise in the kitchen did not disappear, but it changed again, no longer scattered, no longer chasing itself, just quieter, more contained, and Richard stood there for a second longer, the paper still in front of him, the handwriting no longer just notes, but something else entirely, something he had overlooked because it did not come from a title or a position, but from someone who had been paying attention when no one else was. The phone was still at his ear, and on the other end, Ava had gone quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she did not need to anymore. He could hear the absence of noise where she was, a contrast that felt heavier now than before. "We are holding it," he said finally, not confidently, not as a claim, but as an update, honest, measured. There was a brief pause. Then her voice returned, softer this time. "Then keep it steady," she said, and there was no instruction after that, no correction, just that. And it was enough. Richard lowered the phone slightly, not ending the call yet, just letting the moment settle, and for the first time that night, he did not feel like he was reacting to what was breaking. He felt like he was responsible for what would hold, A server passed by him, then stopped, turning back just slightly. "Table 12 asked to speak with you again," she said. But her tone was different now. Not urgent, not strained, just neutral, and Richard nodded, placing the pen down beside the paper before stepping out of the kitchen. The dining room felt different when he walked back in. Not calm, not fixed, but quieter, conversations lower, movements more measured. The same table was still there, the man still seated, but the untouched plate had been replaced. And this time, there was no immediate reaction, just a pause. The man looked up as Richard approached, holding his gaze for a second longer than before. Then he gestured slightly toward the plate, not praising it, not criticizing it, just acknowledging it. And that small gesture carried more weight than any review. Richard did not speak right away. He stood there, letting the silence hold, then said, "We slowed it down." Simple, direct, no explanation attached, and the man nodded once. "It shows," he replied, just as simple. And that was it. No apology demanded, no defense offered, just recognition. And Richard stepped back, not because he had nothing else to say, but because there was nothing else that needed to be said in that moment. As he turned, his eyes moved briefly across the room, not scanning for problems this time, but noticing the details he had missed before, the pacing, the pauses, the space between actions. And he understood something that had not been clear to him at the start of the night. This place had never been held together by pressure. It had been held together by attention, and attention was something he had taken for granted. He brought the phone back to his ear, but he did not speak immediately, and neither did Ava. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything that had shifted without needing to be said. "I should have listened," he said. Finally, the words quiet, not for effect, just true. There was a pause on the other end, longer this time, and when she responded, her voice did not change. "You are now," she said. And that was not forgiveness, not quite, but it was not rejection either. It was something in between, something that left room for what came next. Richard nodded slightly, even though she could not see it, then ended the call, not abruptly, just naturally, placing the phone down on the edge of the host's stand as he stood there for a moment longer, the restaurant still moving around him, not perfect, not fully restored, but no longer falling apart. And if you stayed with this moment, if you felt the shift not in the noise but in the quiet that followed, then you already understand what changed here. And maybe you have seen something like this before in your own life. So if this story stayed with you, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications and share where you are watching from. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that hold everything together, even when no one is looking.